Don't come back! Or you'll die!
I was speechless when I suddenly received a call from my husband while I was on an overseas business trip. His voice was filled with a sense of urgency. Then, he repeatedly said,
Do not come back to the country until I contact you.
Before abruptly hanging up the phone. What on earth is going on? No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't figure out what he meant. The ominous message left me feeling crushed by anxiety and fear. I tried calling him back to get a proper explanation, but I couldn't get through. Little did I know at that moment what kind of situation was unfolding. I am Nancy, 35 years old. I worked as a technician at a major manufacturer. 5 years ago, I married my husband Jason, who worked in sales for a trading company, and we've been living together ever since. Even though we were often busy and our paths didn't cross much, the time spent with him in the home we built when we got married was the most important thing to me. I often thought about how much fun it would be when we had children. I also dreamed of expanding our house one day to bring our parents to live with us. My in-laws live far away, and since we couldn't visit them often, it was a constant worry for me. On the other hand, my parents live nearby and would sometimes come over to help with household chores, knowing how busy we were. I was always grateful to Jason for accepting their help without any complaints. However, my husband had his flaws. He would say,
Work relationships and hobbies cost money.
And spent all of his salary on himself. Despite my repeated warnings, he couldn't shake off his bachelor habits. We managed our living expenses with my salary, but since I was also saving for the future, the money I could spend freely was very limited. Then one day, my husband suddenly asked me to pay $20,000. What? Such a large sum of money? What for?
I became a guarantor for a friend,
He said.
but now I can't get in touch with him, so I have to pay.
I was shocked that he had become a guarantor without my knowledge, and I turned pale at the amount of $20,000. However, my husband remained unfazed. He then showed me a bank book and said,
We can use this to pay.
I froze when I saw the bank book. It was my account, where I had been saving little by little each month for when we had children. Wait. You can't use that. I've worked so hard to save it.
Why? There's no point in keeping money you won't use. You can't have kids anymore anyway, so it's just wasted money.
That's terrible. I was devastated by his cruel words and his mocking laugh. I couldn't stop the tears from flowing, and I was unable to say anything more. It hurt so much to have my efforts and hopes for the future dismissed. Jason didn't care that I was crying. He went into his study and ignored me for the rest of the night, not coming out until the next morning, despite my attempts to talk to him through the door. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I realized I couldn't let my husband have his way. I had to make sure he didn't use that savings. So, after Jason left for work, I went into his study to search for the bank book and card. But no matter how thoroughly I searched the room, I couldn't find them anywhere. Panicking at the thought of being too late, I called my husband, but he didn't answer. Eventually, I received a message from him saying,
I'm on a business trip and won't be back for a few days.
3 days later, when I returned home from work, I found the bank book and card carelessly left on the living room table. With a sense of dread, I quickly checked the bank book and saw that all the money I had saved had been withdrawn. How could he do this to me? I was heartbroken and furious, and I couldn't stop crying. Although I had been concerned about his extravagant spending, I had tolerated it because we managed to get by. But at that moment, my patience reached its limit. However, just when I thought we needed to have a proper discussion, I was assigned an overseas business trip. I was entrusted with a major project, and the duration was at least 1 month, possibly extending to 3 months. In addition to my usual work, my days off were often consumed by preparing for the trip. Meanwhile, my husband seemed to be deliberately avoiding me, and there were many days when we didn't see each other at home. In the end, without having the chance to talk things through with him, I left for my overseas assignment. A month and a half later, I was pleased to find that the work was progressing well, and I could return home earlier than expected. During my time abroad, my husband was often unreachable by phone, and our communication was limited to messages. Despite my lingering frustration with him, the pressure of work and the unfamiliarity of living abroad left me feeling anxious and lonely. When I emailed him about my return date, he uncharacteristically called me back immediately.
Don't come back yet! Or you'll die!
He said urgently. I was momentarily stunned by his sudden outburst. What he told me next was incredibly shocking.
Actually, I was away on a business trip for 2 days, and when I got back, the house had been ransacked. Someone apparently broke in through a smashed window.
What? We got robbed.
No, nothing valuable was stolen. But your room was in the worst condition. They said it might have been a crime motivated by revenge.
Since the perpetrator hadn't been caught yet, and there was a danger in returning home, my husband emphasized.
Do not come back now.
Seeing how serious he seemed, I was overcome with anxiety and fear, and I immediately canceled my return flight. Maybe I unknowingly did something to make someone resentful. Being alone in my hotel room, all I could think about were negative thoughts. Desperate to know more about the situation, I called my husband multiple times, but I couldn't reach him. However, when I finally managed to get in touch with my husband, I sensed something was off. When I tried to ask about the house being ransacked, he only talked about work and friends, avoiding the topic entirely. Yet, when I asked if I could return home, he was adamant, saying,
Absolutely not.
Is the police investigation progressing? How long do I have to stay here? I'm anxious being alone.
We don't have detailed information yet. Just stay put until I say it's okay, all right?
His vague responses made me wonder if there was something he couldn't tell me. Maybe he already knew who the perpetrator was and was trying to protect me from the shock. With little information to go on, I was consumed with worry. Later that night, I was further confused by an email from my mother. She said my husband had told her that my work wasn't going well and that there was no definite return date. I couldn't understand why he would lie like that, but I continued the conversation with my mother, not wanting to worry her. Still, waiting for updates while being overseas, clueless about what was happening, was pure agony. I decided I had to see for myself what was going on. Unable to bear it any longer, I decided to return to America without telling my husband. The next day, I secretly returned to America and headed straight home. I will accept whatever happens. It will be all right. I reassured myself as I got out of the taxi in front of the house, only to be shocked to find that it was up for sale. Contrary to what my husband had told me, the house hadn't been ransacked, and the windows weren't broken. I unlocked the front door and cautiously stepped inside, only to find the place completely empty. The furniture we had chosen together, My clothes and books, all gone. I had mentally prepared myself for danger upon my return, but the reality that greeted me was beyond anything I had imagined. Not understanding what was going on, I knew I needed to find Jason. Since I had returned without telling him, I couldn't ask him directly where he was. Even if I did, I couldn't be sure he would tell me the truth. So, I decided to use my phone's location services to find out where he was. 2 hours later, I found myself in a city adorned with sparkling neon lights. I was keeping watch in front of a certain club when my intoxicated husband stumbled out, supported by a female staff member.
The house is likely to sell for a good price, and with my gloomy crying wife not coming back for a while, I'm free to have the time of my life.
Clearly under the influence, he didn't hold back his loud, cheerful demeanor. The woman linking arms with him asked,
"Are you not going to leave your wife?"
Ha ha.
He crudely laughed it off.
That woman is my cash cow. I'm not letting her go. She'll keep working hard for me from now on.
With those words, he pulled the woman closer by her shoulder. Unable to watch any further, I quickly left the scene, feeling heartbroken and betrayed by the husband I had trusted. Wiping away tears repeatedly, I told myself, no more tears. I have to be strong. Summoning up my courage, I resolved to plan and execute something despite my faltering heart. A week later, in the evening, I headed to the hotel and sat in the lobby, waiting for a certain person. About an hour later, a man in a branded suit and luxury watch arrived and stopped by the reception. Finally, the moment had come. After taking a deep breath and giving myself a slap on the cheek to gather my resolve, and I walked towards him. The man, emanating a strong scent of cologne, visibly startled and took a step back when he saw my face.
What are you doing here?
Waiting for you, Jason. As I approached my husband, he clicked his tongue and glared at me.
Who do you think you are, ignoring my words and coming back home like this?
Meeting after 2 months, those were his first words to me, and my anger reached its peak. How dare you say that? My shout echoed through the hotel lobby, drawing the attention of staff and guests alike. Among them, the most surprised was my husband himself. He looked flustered.
Let's go to the room and talk first.
He grabbed my arm and started walking. I stared daggers at his back in silence. Upon entering the room, my husband threw his bag down and took off his jacket, pushing it towards me. He gestured with his chin for me to hang it up. Who does he think he is, acting all high and mighty at a time like this? He doesn't understand anything. Filled with anger, I threw the jacket back at him defiantly, catching him off guard with my unprecedented rebellious attitude. I came back home to see the truth with my own eyes.
Ha! What are you talking about?
You mentioned before about being a guarantor for your friend. Give me his name, contact information, and workplace. I'll tell him to repay the money quickly. I confronted my husband with a piercing stare. But he looked bewildered as if he didn't know what I was talking about. It was incredibly painful for me, yet it seemed like something he could easily forget. That realization filled me with unbearable frustration.
Oh.
As if recalling something, he lifted his head and reluctantly loosened his tie. Letting out a deep sigh, he resigned himself.
The thing about being a guarantor for my friend. It was a lie.
He confessed. To my shock, the $20,000 debt turned out to be from my husband's reckless spending.
Unlike you, I have expenses to maintain social connections. Stop dredging up the past.
He defiantly yelled at me, shifting the blame onto me. His words about the past finally broke my patience. The only reason you could repay that debt was because of the money I had saved. I forcefully slammed the nearby table and confronted him. You used my money without permission, never paid me back, and now you're saying it's all in the past? Don't you dare act so self-righteous. Overwhelmed by my outburst, my husband staggered back. I took a deep breath to calm myself down. Then, shall we talk about the $50,000 debt you accumulated while I was away? At those words, my husband turned pale. I sat down on a nearby chair and silently gestured for him to sit across from me. He realized that my demeanor was different from usual, nervously took a seat, and feigned ignorance.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Did you think I only returned to America today?
What? Isn't that the case?
I've been back for some time. I found out you've been using this hotel as your home base by tracking your movements with GPS. I looked at him coldly, and he lowered his head, sweat beading on his forehead. I've had the chance to investigate your activities until today. Taking advantage of my absence due to the overseas business trip, my husband had been frequenting clubs and extravagantly partying with women. Additionally, he had been splurging on expensive limited edition brand items and gambling away money. As a result, in just a month and a half, he had racked up an astounding $50,000 in debt. To cover this debt, he had sold our house without my consent. That house, with its prime location and meticulously designed rooms, was a highly desirable property. Even I, a layperson, knew it would sell quickly. The appraisal of the house exceeded my husband's expectations, prompting him to decide on an immediate sale. However, upon receiving my notification of return, he panicked and lied to prevent it.
Our home has been vandalized and is unsafe.
How exactly did you plan to explain selling the house to me?
I thought I could convince you that a house someone broke into was bad luck, so we should move.
His cunning left me speechless, and I let out a deep sigh. Did you really think you could sell the house without consulting me? Seeing his face pale, I slammed a set of documents from my bag onto the table. He hurriedly grabbed them, and upon reading, fell off his chair.
How? How did this happen?
The documents nullified the house sale contract he had signed. He was visibly shaken, holding his head in disbelief. Too bad your plan didn't work out. He seemed to want to say something, but I ignored him and returned the documents to my bag. The cost of building our house was covered by the money I had saved diligently since my single days, so the house was in my name. For anyone other than the title holder to sell the house, my consent was required. My husband had forged a power of attorney without my consent. Naturally, such a contract was invalid, so I informed the real estate company and took the necessary steps to nullify the sale. Forging a power of attorney is a serious crime. Hearing this, my husband began to tremble. Oh, and there's another crime you're guilty of. My husband had been embezzling money from his company. Whenever his fraud was about to be discovered, he would shift the blame onto his subordinates. One of these subordinates, who had grown suspicious of being repeatedly blamed for things he hadn't done, had found evidence of my husband's wrongdoing.
How? How did this happen?
Your subordinate Harrison is an old classmate of mine. He's a bit clumsy but very serious and responsible. While investigating my husband's activities, I coincidentally reconnected with Harrison. Upon learning each other's situations, we decided to work together. My husband looked shocked but then quickly scoffed and defied me.
I'm well regarded at the company. I don't know what Harrison found, but no one will believe a guy who's constantly being written up.
When I heard those words, a deep sense of disgust welled up inside me. I couldn't believe he was shifting blame onto a hard-working subordinate without any remorse for his own misconduct. My husband was still sitting on the floor and looked up at me with a sneer. I don't know what you're misunderstanding, but it won't be Harrison who reports you to the company. It's me.
What?
I have the evidence of your misconduct from Harrison, and if I tell them about all the debts you've accumulated, it'll be pretty convincing, won't it? I had already contacted his company, and a meeting with his direct superior was scheduled. The heads of the accounting and HR departments would also be present. Even if my husband tried to talk his way out of it, there was no escaping once the company started a thorough investigation.
You're not serious, right? We're married. You can't do this to me. Just this once. Let it slide, please.
Gone was his arrogant demeanor. He was now crying and clinging to me. This sudden change only fueled my anger. I will never forgive you. I pulled out another piece of paper from my bag and slammed it on the table.
A divorce paper. Wait. If you leave, who's going to pay my debts?
You should repay your own debts. It's only natural. As I scolded him for his foolishness, he hung his head in silence. And since the house contract is void, you need to return the down payment immediately, I demanded. At that moment, my husband turned pale and clutched his head.
But most of the down payment is already gone. How am I supposed to pay it all back?
He stammered. I knew my husband would spend whatever money he had on hand. But that was no longer my concern. I'm not your cash cow. Sign this immediately. I insisted, pushing him to sign the divorce papers. Reluctantly, he did, and I quickly stashed them in my bag. Our marriage, which had felt both long and short, was finally over. Surprisingly, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. You should also be prepared for a police investigation regarding the forged power of attorney. Goodbye. We will never see each other again. Without another glance at him, I walked out of the hotel room. A year later, I learned that my husband had repaid the embezzled funds but was fired from his job, avoiding criminal charges. He had apparently begged his parents for help, and his reputation shifted from being a proud son to a disgrace. Although he wasn't prosecuted for the forged power of attorney, he lost his job and home, left with nothing but significant debt. Now, he lives in constant fear, running from his creditors. As for me, I renovated the house I loved and invited my parents to live with me. The three of us now share a happy home. With another major project on the horizon, I will soon travel abroad again for work. Life is fulfilling, and I cherish every moment spent in my beloved home with the people who matter most. I am Karen, a single woman working at a chemical company in the countryside. When people hear chemical, they are often surprised that I am a woman. However, I have been good at chemistry since I was young and even got a hazardous materials license in high school. I love my current job and continue to enjoy it. I was born and bred in this small rural town. In the past, the only place to go was the candy store, but recently there have been many changes, such as the construction of a new airport and a tall apartment building in front of the station. And I don't know if it's specific to rural areas or unique to this town, but since long ago, there have been many delinquent youths resembling biker gangs here. Even now, sometimes you can hear the sound of police cars chasing them late at night. Though they're called youths, it seems lately there are many university students among them. At one time, I went out drinking with colleagues and ended up walking alone on the streets around 2 a.m. Since it was a weekday night, there were few people around, so any noise echoed loudly. Yes, for example, the sound of dozens of motorcycles. After a while, a group of motorcycles stopped ahead and were doing something dangerous. Because I've always had a strong sense of justice, I instinctively intervened. As a result, I became a target along with my family by a young man who held a grudge against me, and the situation took an unexpected turn. The men from the motorcycle group are talking to a man standing at a taxi stand several tens of meters ahead of me. It's clear they're not asking for directions, and seeing the fear on the man's face, I couldn't stand by anymore. I put my phone, which I had been using, back into my pocket and approached the motorcycle group. "What are you guys doing?" At the sound of my voice, the men all turned around simultaneously. They appeared to be adults, definitely over 18 years old, and I quickly understood they were probably university students in their early 20s, grouped together as a team. The momentary distraction caused by my call allowed the man to run away. Then, one man glared at me as if he had lost his prey. Probably the leader among them, he scanned me from head to toe as if sizing me up.
"You, woman, don't stick your nose into this."
He spat out those words. The other men around him smirked and chuckled. For a moment, I felt in danger, but then suddenly the sirens of a police car blared. I'm not that foolish. As soon as I realized the man was being extorted, I immediately called the police and kept the call connected. After a brief questioning, I was released. I probably should have waited for the police to arrive, but the man had his bag snatched and was being searched through, so I couldn't just leave him alone. Of course, the police assured me they would recover the bag and contact the owner, which was a relief. The motorcycle group, especially the leader, looked at me with a resentful expression. I hoped that this incident would make them reconsider their actions and stop. Some time had passed, and I was sleeping at my parents' house when I woke up to a loud noise. It was the sound of something breaking and the laughter of several men. I quickly went outside and, as expected, saw about 4 young men laughing uproariously as they ran away. They had broken the window glass in the bathroom. Our family home is quite old, and perhaps due to its aging condition, the window was easily broken. Fortunately, since it happened late at night, no one was injured, and my parents were sleeping safely in their bedroom away from the bathroom. I felt relieved, but at the same time, memories of that motorcycle group from earlier came to mind. Until now, we've never experienced such harassment, and my parents aren't the type to provoke anyone's grudge. So, it seems the perpetrators targeted me specifically. If they had targeted me personally, it would be a different story, but my parents have nothing to do with it. While feeling frustrated about this, I decided to call the police and have them come to inspect the scene. The next day, a contractor came and managed to repair the damage, but the repair costs were quite high, which made me sigh. And then, the following night, I had anticipated they might come back, but it happened sooner than expected. This time, instead of breaking into the house, they were trying to enter the fields behind my parents' house. I could see the fields directly from my room, so I spotted the men. Bastards. I muttered to myself and headed to the fields. On the way there,
Oh crap.
the startled voices of the men echoed. When I got to the field, I found one man lying on the ground twitching, while his mates looked bewildered and didn't know what to do. He's been electrocuted. Are you okay? Seeing him collapse, I became concerned and shouted loudly.
Oh shit.
The other men abandoned their electrocuted friend and fled in a panic. The man lying on the ground had fainted. His eyes rolled back. Clearly, this was the result of his attempt to trespass into the field. So, I had no choice but to wait for the police to arrive. When the police and ambulance arrived, the man was taken to the hospital for treatment. While being questioned late at night, we received a report from another officer who accompanied the man to the hospital, saying he had regained consciousness. According to the officer, the man harbored a grudge because I had called the police on him previously, resulting in him being taken into custody and suspended from university for 2 weeks. The man himself had a motorcycle license, but some of his companions did not, and others were driving under the influence of alcohol. Because of these issues, he was suspended and, during his suspension, he investigated me, and even followed me on my way home from work. He confessed that upon discovering my parents grow high-end fruits in their field, he broke the window glass and attempted to steal the fruits to teach me a lesson. I sighed in disbelief at the absurd reason but never expected to be followed on my way home from work. Our nearest station only has a few people getting off in the evening, and there's only one entrance. So, if he ambushed and watched people coming out, he could immediately find me. I couldn't believe he would go to such lengths out of spite after facing consequences for his own wrongdoing. However, a few days after the incident, the man showed up at my house with his parents in tow. I expected him to apologize for breaking the window glass and trespassing, but instead, he made a shocking demand. Without any warning, the doorbell rang at my house. When I answered, I saw the leader from that incident standing there with his parents, all looking fierce. Confused about what was happening, the parents said,
"You electrocuted our son. That's assault. We're demanding compensation."
They caused a commotion. Huh? Wait, don't you know anything about what happened? Upon saying that, the parents briefly showed a puzzled expression. However, they immediately blamed me and the situation returned to how it was. Taken aback, I looked at the man. He laughed through his nose and sneered at me, sticking his tongue out. Apparently, when questioned by his parents about the suspension and the police contacting them,
I was called a thief and pushed to an electric fence when I just wanted to buy fruits. Before that, I was just riding with friends, but we were called a motorcycle gang and reported to the police.
he explained with nonsense. If I were his parent, I would realize it's odd to be suspended for 2 weeks by being reported mistakenly. However, these parents, who clearly favor their son, seem to blindly believe his story. They've already hired a lawyer and are demanding an absurd $30,000 in compensation. The figure lacks any rational basis, and it's even questionable whether they've actually hired a lawyer. As I frowned and glared at the mother and son, the mother unexpectedly slapped me.
"If you don't pay, we'll take you to court. Just so you know, my grandfather is a well-known politician, and people like you from the countryside can be dealt with in an instant."
She smirked proudly. My family and I should be the victim in this case. Why are we subjected to such mistreatment? There's a saying, like father, like son, which perfectly describes this parent and child. Perhaps, the parents had no common sense, so the child became like them. Let's strike a hard blow to this family, who boast rudely by taking advantage of the power of their politician grandfather. Well, prepare yourself. I won't hold back anymore. Rubbing my slapped cheek, I said, "Wow, this is quite swollen, isn't it? Isn't this assault?"
Ha. I was just giving back the pain my son received, that's all.
The mother retorted angrily with her face turned red. "I don't see how it's fair that I should suffer the consequences of your son's actions when he got caught on that fence to begin with. Just so you know, it's your son's fault for getting caught on that fence, and he was trying to break into the fields to steal fruits. So why should I be the one to be blamed here?" I said so. But the parents still believed their son. Especially the mother. She refused to listen to anything I said. So, I invited them into the house to show them something. What I had to show them was footage from the time of the incident. The reason I had such footage is because my parents' house actually has many security cameras installed. My parents grow high-quality fruits for a living. Our fields were vandalized by thieves in the past, so we installed security cameras around the house and in the fields, as well as electric fences. I explained while showing them the footage of the day when those men attempted to trespass into our fields. Upon seeing the footage, even the parents couldn't deny the truth and got frozen. The man's expressions grew increasingly stern. Ignoring them, I showed them the footage from a few days before that day. This footage is from when we had a window in our bathroom broken. It's just a few days before your son got electrocuted, isn't it? Look, your son's face is clearly captured in the video. We were planning to claim the repair costs for this incident as well, so I'm glad you visited us here," I said with a sarcastic tone and chuckled, and then his parents started trembling. I thought they would finally realize their son's wrongdoing and scold him, but it didn't happen.
Carrying such a strong current that can make people pass out is attempted murder.
Then the son, who had been silent until then, chimed in.
Yeah. It hurt like hell. If I hadn't been taken to the hospital, I might have died right there,"
he said dramatically. Upon seeing this, his parents hugged him tightly. "Leader's mother, you must have been scared." They comforted him with these words. I was thinking about what rubbish sketch I was witnessing. That fence is merely for keeping animals away. Even if it carries current, it just crackles a bit loudly and it's not strong enough to cause a human to faint. As I calmly explained this, they got frozen. Actually, the doctor who examined him mentioned that he likely fainted due to the shock of the electricity, causing his brain to create a false sense that he got a high-voltage electricity. After being taken to the hospital, he didn't require significant treatment and woke up on his own. We have the statement from police interrogation, medical examination, and testimony from the contractor who installed the fence. It has been verified how much current flows through it. It has been determined that there is no harm to the human body, and no fault has been found on our side. Upon hearing this, they fell silent, seemingly having no words left to respond. Still, the mother persisted.
You're immature against a university student. It's worse to report just because they were riding bikes.
She continued to make excuses and resist. Regarding the bike incident, I told them about the noise disturbance, the presence of unlicensed and drunk drivers among his friends. His delinquency is the fault of you, parents who encourage it, isn't it? Upon saying that, they fell completely silent, not uttering a single word thereafter. Afterwards, I told them I'd contacted them through a lawyer to demand compensation for breaking a window, and I let them go home. I thought everything was settled, but the man perhaps reached his breaking point and took drastic action. A few days after their visit, an incident occurred. On that day, I was taking a weekday off as a compensatory holiday and relaxing at home. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside. I heard my parents shouting in panic and a man's angry voice that sounded familiar. I headed to the field, having a bad feeling, only to see that man laughing uproariously while spreading some liquid in the field. The field was in chaos, and all the fruits that were about to be harvested were ruined. My parents, who were just about to start working, had found the man trespassing and destroying the field in broad daylight, and they were telling him to stop. Even from a distance, I was shocked by the devastating scene. I couldn't tell what liquid the man was spreading, and an unknown fear gripped me. If it was gasoline, it could lead to an unavoidable disaster, and there was even a risk of the fire spreading to nearby homes. "Hey, what are you doing?" I shouted, and the man turned around and said with a creepy smile on his face,
I'm going to burn it all down. If the field is burned, you can't do anything, right?
Then he pulled out a lighter. My parents let out cries that sounded almost like screams, but I noticed something when I smelled the liquid. Without that distinctive odor, the likelihood of it being gasoline or kerosene was low. I looked at the discarded can that likely contained the liquid. And then, I realized. If you want to burn it all down, why don't you do it? My outrageous statement shocked my parents as well. However, seeing that I remained composed and considering my profession, they didn't say anything. He seemed to regard my words as a final act of resistance, and attempted to ignite it, but it failed to catch fire. Unable to understand why it didn't work, the man looked bewildered. So, I, who works at a chemical company, explained it to him. I bet that you bought the oil at the supermarket, right? Vegetable oil has a flash point around 250 degrees Celsius, so it's not that easy to ignite. Upon hearing this, the man looked even more puzzled. At that moment, the police, likely already called by my parents, arrived and promptly apprehended the man. He had resisted violently, resulting in his arrest for obstructing official duties. And then the man asked,
How did you know it wouldn't burn?
So I replied, It's because that's my profession. Most people would think it would catch fire, but not me. With that, he looked frustrated as he was taken away to the police station. Afterwards, the man was charged with property damage. Due to the severity of the incident and the fact that it was a repeat offense despite previous warnings, he got convicted with a suspended sentence and was also expelled from his university. Moreover, if it's just compensating for broken window glass, it wouldn't cost much. However, if it's about damaging our field, it's a different story. It included the costs of restoring the field and compensating for the ruined fruits. Also, the covering of the damages for failing to deliver to the stores we had contracts with was added up. The total costs far exceed the arbitrary amount of $30,000 that the man's parents proposed to me. When my lawyer showed them the legal documents detailing the damages and compensation, those parents were reportedly shocked and taken aback. After being expelled from university and returning home, the man apparently worked tirelessly day and night to repay the damages his parents had covered. Besides, his politician grandfather decided to sever ties with that family, considering his own dignity. Their relationship was probably superficial. As for me, I have been living in relief and enjoying the peace I finally got back. Since then, I've noticed fewer sightings of motorcycle gangs, which has made life more peaceful. I didn't have any hobbies, so my only enjoyment was going out drinking. When I attended a gathering organized by my friends, I met the love of my life. After dating for 2 years, we got married. I don't have any knowledge of growing fruits, but it turns out his family runs a farm. Being the second son and not planning to inherit the family farm anyway, he agreed to live with my family. My parents are delighted to have a successor son-in-law. Now that the field has been restored, I'd like to support my family business from now on.